Today we've got many thousands, probably over 10,000 people have made their way to Parliament, despite the transport difficulties and rail strike, and surrounded Parliament on a human chain in support of Julian Assange. Julian is not convicted of any crime. He has not committed any crime. He's been 4 years in a maximum security prison in Britain. That's the first question we would ask. Well, hang on, how is it that somebody that's not guilty of anything is in prison? He's been sought by the United States under the Espionage Act. The Espionage Act, the USA gives itself a global coverage for the Espionage Act. They want him back in the USA, or to go to the USA, where he would face a prison sentence of 175 years. His crime, in their eyes, is that he released a lot of documents which indicated exactly what happened in the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq and the wars in Libya and Syria and the destruction of the natural environment in many parts of the world by armed forces and by big business. And he released all this through WikiLeaks. It was very embarrassing to the US government, very embarrassing to the CIA, very embarrassing to all the other governments that are part of that security chain. He diligently dug out as a journalist and released information that actually makes the world safer. He's been condemned by the governments of the USA and Britain and some, but not all, European governments. However, other governments around the world have taken a very different approach. They see in Julian somebody that's speaking up for the poorer people and the poorest countries in the world. And I think President López Obrador of Mexico has set a wonderful example by using his daily press conference to speak up for Julian Assange, directly approach both President Trump and President Biden to ask them not to appeal against the decision, which was to allow him to remain in Britain, and offered him asylum in Mexico if he chooses to take that up. At the moment, the British government have said they want to extradite him to the USA. That's been challenged in the courts and will eventually go to the European Court of Human Rights. Our rights in this country to be protected by the European Convention of Human Rights are at risk from the new human rights bill being proposed by the government. This matters because if Julian is sent to the USA and dies in prison, then what message is that to any other journalist in the world? Just suppose you're a journalist in Indonesia or Australia or India or somewhere where you're concerned about nuclear testing, concerned about environmental damage, concerned about military alliances and what they do to people. You're going to think twice, 3, 4 and 5 times before you print the story, because you'll see what happened to Julian Assange. It's not only a direct threat to any journalist that does place their head above the parapet, it becomes self-censorship of journalists all over the world. So my appeal is to journalists, they don't have to politically agree with me, just understand the danger to your profession, your chosen line of work of doing this. And if I could, I'd just say this to President Biden directly. President Biden, you were elected on the biggest ever mandate of any US president. You were elected by people who've always campaigned for peace, who campaigned for the Civil Rights Act, who campaigned to defend those that exposed Watergate and issues like that, Daniel Ellsberg and many others. Are you going to place yourself in history as the president who gave Julian Assange a death sentence? Or how about your place in history being the president who stood up against the hierarchies, stood up for free speech, stood up for journalism and said Julian Assange should go free? Thank you.